Hello there, and welcome to the Rambling to Myself podcast. I'm your host, Aaron, and today we are in the music corner, and I'll be continuing where I left off in ranking Weezer's discography. But before I continue, I would like to explain why I'm only picking top 3 tracks instead of shoving as many as I can into the S rank. Feel as though like it would just be more representative of the album and gives me more room to justify and reason as to why I think certain tracks deserve the spot instead of shoving all the songs I just think are good into S rank without giving it a second thought. So in essence, it just gives me the ability to talk more about certain songs. I may or may not increase my cap on the amount of S rank songs eventually or down the line, so stay tuned to find out. For this video, I'll be covering the more decent album that Weezer has to offer. That about does it for the intro. Without further ado, the Green Album. Don't Let Go. The song has a classic rock sound to it that just melts very well, with Rivers' tight vocals giving this sad feeling that something may be off in the relationship that the song is trying to portray. It also serves as a perfect introduction to the general sound and the feel of the whole album, as it places the very foundation and literal format that almost all the songs will follow down the line in the album. I think this song works great as a return to form and shows what Weezer would have gone for if they had straight down the blue path with a far more safer approach to everything. By starting the album off with a much more polished return from the chaotic Pinkerton, it really shows that Weezer was taking a step back from the initial reaction and flop that was Pinkerton. Probably the best of the bunch of power chord, worst chorus solo with wah pedal chorus structure, which is very, very prevalent on the album and would be the main point as to why most people are turned off by the whole album and would rank it very lowly. Whoa. Photograph. As stated previously, I think as a follow-up to Don't Let Go, this is a great song, but on its own there's really not much to talk about. I do enjoy this song solely because of how it sounds, though there's not really anything I can talk about that Don't Let Go has already done better, aside from the slight cheering at the end and fun that the band is having throughout the song, I suppose. As for the song itself, I find that the mix is quite atrocious at certain heavier parts, especially around the pre-choruses, as the rhythm guitars turn into this heavy, muddy chugging mess that just explodes in your ears. But it does sound fine when it transitions into a chorus, so there's that. Unlike most of the other songs on the album, the sheen of Don't Let Go still lingers and allows for this song to not be bogged down as a result. But beyond that, this song really just exists to serve a nice follow-up from Don't Let Go into Hash Pipe. Hash Pipe. Hash Pipe. I actually really like this song as I think it brings something the other tracks are lacking, and that's enthusiasm. From the energetic and repetitive metal-esque riff to a much more exciting drum pattern, the song in general has a punch the old album lacks, especially on the latter half of the album that really causes the album's downfall. I do have little gripes with the song, and that's how the vocal filter shines through on the chorus just a bit much. But aside from Smile, I think as far as new ideas and excitement goes for the overused song structure the album follows, there's really not much else to talk about in this song. It is a shame though, cause I feel like if this song was fitted into Melodroid, it could have sounded far better, as it does follow that album sound far more than it does Green Album, and along with a more energetic drum, I think that those missing elements from this track is what's holding it back from making it sound less generic and could have made into something special. But instead we just get a watered down version in the Green Album that just stands out simply because of the process of elimination, and the other songs are just really backwards in comparison to this song. But aside from my nitpicking, I do immensely enjoy this track, and it's definitely one of the better ones on the album. Hip Hip. One of the entry points to Weezer, and pretty much must listen to any newcomers. Island in the Sun is a song that is far different than the entirety of Green. Probably the most creative song on the album and one of the highlights to Rivers' writing. I really enjoy this song and would say that this is easily one of my favorites in the whole of Weezer's catalog, despite of how overplayed it may be to some fans. From the beautifully mixed acoustic guitars to the wavering clean riff that makes you want to get up and wave your arms, into this heavy chorus and a straight to the point solo, I think that the song achieves a perfect balance of heaviness and softness that just makes this song really good. It does so in a way that the change up doesn't feel ham-fisted or thrown in for the sake of having a switch up. For example, like the tempo change in Where's My Sex in Hurley. Also, the hips and woes throughout the song are done in such a way that they don't feel tossed in just to make the song more sing along or poppy, but rather to add this layer of carefree atmosphere of just being on a holiday. Just knowing that this song originally came from a simple riff that could have passed for a in the basement demo adds a bit of sentimentality to this track and the lonely fleeting feeling that it has to give to the song Crab. So, Crab, this is probably the last song I really enjoyed in terms of album flow, for sheer personal preference, if anything. I feel as though Weezer should have branched out a bit more or mixed in some more material from albums such as Maladroit so that the sound of the album doesn't become completely boring and stale. There's nothing inherently wrong with this song, as with most of the second half of the album. It's just that there's a lack of inspiration and innovation, and there should have been a bit more experimentation or attempts to change up some songs as it feels very uninspired when every song sounds the same after this. If they had done what they did in the first half of the album with Island in the Sun, Hashpipe, with all these creative ideas, I think that Green album would have been far better, and it's really a shame that it's pretty much downhill from here to an extent. Knock down, drag out. I adore this song a lot, but I think in context of the album, it doesn't help to have this song in the track list, as it really drags out the relatively short album runtime to feel far longer than it actually is, which is never really a good thing. The attempt to speed things up before the solo and final chorus is a nice switch up, but solely based on album placement, I'm gonna have to put this under my least favorite track section. Not because I hate the song, I do enjoy it. I think the production's pretty great, the ideas presented are quite good. But it's just that this song marks the point where most people, including myself, would pretty much just turn off or ditch the album as a result of its misplacement and River's never-ending monotonous vocals at this point. Smile. To better illustrate my previous point would be this track. This is easily one of the better tracks on the album, and if you play it on its own, I think it does have a lot of great potential, and as it does genuinely sound fantastic, this dreary, tired vocals actually making sense here, unlike River slurring throughout Crab and Knockdown Drag Out for no real reason except he needed to put vocals in, which just sounds like he got too drunk and forgot that it was studio day. It has so much potential to become my favorite standalone track from the album, but because of how far back it is in an album that has pretty much the same sounding songs, I think the song suffers immensely as a result of album placement, if anything. Similar to the Longshot's first album, Love Is For Losers, the song Turn Me Loose is a fantastic track and one of my favorites on the album, but I initially hated it because it was at the back of the album, squished between a lot of mediocre tracks, similar to how Smile is located here, squished between Knockdown, Drag Out, and Simple Pages, which is actually my least favorite song on the album, which I'll be covering right now. Simple Pages. It's a piece of crap. I honestly think that this is the one song I can't stand on this album. It feels like just it was written for the sake of having material, and it's just pure filler, and I can't help but skip it most times when I'm casually listening to this album, far before I even thought of reviewing all the albums or had any ideas of ranking them. I don't have anything to add on to this track that I haven't already said. Bland song structure, album dragging its feet and all that. And I think this is the worst offender of all the negative points I've brought up so far, as it doesn't really even do a good job of standing alone as a track far away from the album. For a track that's under 3 minutes, it sure feels a lot longer than that. Glorious
piece
Day.
of crap.
Remember when I said earlier in Island in the Sun that they did the sing-along parts, right? This is the opposite of that. Rivers sounds like he's about to fall asleep when singing the hey heys and the chorus. Similar to my gripes with Simple Pages, this song is just very skippable filler. I have nothing else to say.
It's a piece of crap.
Lucky number 10, as with most Weezer albums, the final track. Honestly, it's a really boring closer. It tries to speed up a bit to change up things, but when most of your audience has already fallen asleep or left at this point, I don't think anyone wants to sit through half of the longest track on the album for a little switch up that isn't even that creative, and your lead singer sounds like he just wants to sleep. That's all I have to say.
Bonus track. I didn't know that this wasn't actually the closer on the normal versions, and because when I checked Wikipedia, it turns out that this song's only on the UK and Japan release of the album. Because I had listened to the Spotify version of the whole album, and all I have to say is, wow, this closer is actually good. And if they threw out anything from the second half to end this album, I think it would have been a lot better. Oh Girlfriend is a horrible closer, and I can only imagine the disappointment of fans who had to endure that as the end of such a bland album. This lo-fi garage demo feel really adds this sense of loneliness and is on par with Butterfly for me for the atmosphere and sensation it creates, especially with the cliffhanger ending giving this feeling that the author is still recovering from his broken heart. I Do is a song that's simply short and sweet and gets the message across to the listener. It has always been the perfect closer to me to Green because it's actually a good song on its own and does something different along with perfectly tying up the themes of heartbreak and sadness throughout the album. And now that we have pretty much covered every single track on Green album, it's time for the conclusion. The biggest weakness to this album is how one note it is, with minor exceptions in tracks like Island in the Sun and Old Girlfriend. And all the songs pretty much follow the same format with production and sound, as they are simple rock songs with a wah solo following the vocal pattern just tossed in. And at times, even the similar production falls short at certain tracks. This in turn makes it very easy for me to skip or gloss over many of the tracks, as I'm not really invested in the album, since the sound of the second half of the album is pretty much done better in the first two tracks of Don't Let Go and Photograph. I said in passing throughout my track review that I think that the tracks do a good job in standing alone as great singles and one-offs that I play while driving in a playlist. And yes, I think that the album succeeds in having good tracks, but as a full album experience front to back, I think the album fails to provide any form of variety and flow, as the songs just blend into this ball of mush to create the Green album. I feel as a non-compilation album, it fails spectacularly at being an actual release of an album. It's quite easy to see why most fans would just put this dirt bottom even below Raditude, as the album is simply too safe and sterile. And at best, it's inoffensive like Pacific Daydreams, but doesn't really go anywhere creative or innovation-wise in the history of the band's discography. However, for me, the one thing stopping this album from being far lower than the other two is the simple fact that there's a lot of genuine enjoyment to be had from the album here and there, along with there not being any significant lows aside from sparks of boredom. This, added with the general sound I've come to grown up with, does solidify the album for being what it is, a painfully average album that doesn't really do much else. And fun fact, Green album was pretty high up for me for the longest time before I dove deeper into what Weezer had to offer as a whole. Moving on from Green album, I don't really have much of a transition in mind, so let's just move on to Maladroit. American Gigolo. I think that this song is a perfect opening to the album, establishing a far better production and containing these huge thick guitar tones in comparison to Green, along with far superior drumming and actual guitar solos. The way that the main riff just glides, especially through the second verse, is really well done, and the heaviness in some of Weezer's best production to date is found on this track itself. It is also quite evident that Patrick's drums are our main topic of discussion, as he really does put his best game on for most of the tracks on the album. I also enjoy River's sarcastic laughter at the end of this track and the bridge sections, as I really think it adds to the general darker atmosphere that the song is trying to go for. Whilst this song is pretty much the closest I've gotten to giving another S rank, I feel like it just falls short of an emotional gut punch or an inherent lack of fun that the other songs I ranked as such has to offer, and this is why I'll put in the A rank instead, but it is very close. Dope Nose. This song is a fantastic follow-up to American Gigolo, with the better production definitely helping with the general direction the album's trying to take. The drums on this track is pretty fantastic, with it constantly panning throughout the song, and the energy of the song does help to counter some of the blandness that some listeners may encounter. As for the most part, you can feel that Weezer is actually having fun recording the song, and as a result, in turn, the listeners do feel like they're having a good time. The guitar work is phenomenal, and the song is just a pleasure to sit through as everyone is having fun. It also does a great job of linking American Gigolo and Keep Fishing by easing into the lighter singing, band interaction heavy sound of Keep Fishing, whilst maintaining some of the residual gnarliness of American Gigolo with the guitar solos and these huge guitar works.
How
Keep
cool
Fishing.
is that?
One of my favorite songs to sing along to in the whole of Weezer's discography. Keep Fishing is a song that boasts also the best music video because River smiling with Kermit is beautifully adorable. Every time I hear this song, I can just imagine River swaying on stage playing this song.
I absolutely fucking love the chorus on this song, and I do find the bridge to be really cute with the backing vocals doing this barber quartet as type of singing. There's a lot of energy in this song, and I think that's the strongest point of this track, along with Rivers' Pinkerton like vocal delivery, as I feel there's a sense of real honesty and emotion in the song that shines through every now and then, along with the seamless flow from verse to chorus to bridge, despite them all sounding so different and varying in terms of heaviness. The little flashes of riffs here and there also give the song a bit more flair, along with the power chords and drum fills that just take these parts that give the song a very huge anthemic sound that just elevates the song so much. I also feel that the band's interactions throughout the song are a bit more natural than in Dope Knows, especially in the whole of the last chorus. The song's just a lot of fun to listen to and is easily one of my favorites off the album. Fantastic song. Take Control. Going into this track, you have to be prepared to enjoy the main riff and really jive with it, or not really enjoy the track at all, because I feel the whole foundation of this song falls on the riff itself. It's the kind of song you just want to headbang to mindlessly without caring much about what's going on, because this song feels like a heavier Green Album track with much better production and solo, along with extremely fancy guitar work. I also feel the last chorus drags on a bit, and the drums do feel like they trip over themselves a little at the end too. One of the weaker tracks by far. Death and Destruction. Death and Destruction, probably the most popular and well-liked song from this album throughout the community. I think that in this song, the solo is really great, and the general feel and sound of the song is fantastic, but my personal gripe with it is that the weakness of this song comes down to it simply being cool ideas mushed together, from the clean overtones and Rivers' feeble singing to the explosive intervals with these huge sweeping guitars that are bigger than life itself. The song does an amazing job of setting an emotional atmosphere throughout. However, whilst the song is fantastic for what it is, an atmospheric, emotionally driven track, I feel it could have gone above and beyond to an excellent track with a conclusion thrown in somewhere. As a whole track, it honestly does an excellent job of building atmosphere and emotion, but as a result of lacking a real conclusive finale, it makes it feel as though the song is just flopping from acoustic to rock very well without reaching a real payoff. But in understanding the song was initially supposed to be an instrumental, it does put into context that this song would have probably served more as an interlude to the album, if anything, which is probably why it is the way it is, I suppose.
How cool is that?
Slob. This is easily one of my favorite tracks on the album, along with Burn Jam and Keep Fishing. Slob is a song that really pulls you in with this deceiving softer start and just jumps into this drum beat constantly droning into the chorus. And when the chorus does end, you think you get a nice breather in the second verse, but it just picks up the second half of the second verse and trashes you back into the chorus, where Rivers is constantly shouting at you, or well, himself, not to be a slob, as if some desperate cry for help. The return of the green vast spacious solos is a nice touch, because there's actually some semblance of a solo instead of Green Album's vocal melody copy paste here and there, put in a wah solo and all that. And Rivers' vocal delivery is pretty fitting and well done, as it sounds like he's actually singing with some passion instead of just singing for the sake of having vocals, with the way he accentuates the word slob, almost like he's slurring it. One thing to note is that Slob works really well as a song to bridge between something soft to something much heavier, as it's just this constant, hard-hitting track that keeps soaring higher and higher from what was a deceiving soft beginning. It's a perfect transition from a soft track like Death and Destruction, and I think that this song would have far benefited if it was placed after Burn Jam, as the random jump cut from soft to loud, from Burn Jam to Space Rock, is a really jarring cut and, in my opinion, messes with the album flow, which I will get into when I do talk about Space Rock.
How
Burnt
cool is
Jam.
that?
A burnt piece of what? A burnt piece of jam. Probably one of my favorite tracks on the album. The mix fits extremely well with these funky jazz chords that build into this spiraling alternative metal riff. In comparison to Death and Destruction, I feel as though the atmosphere it sets is far more effective, as the song in general is far more light-hearted and happy sounding with the doo-doo-doos here and there. I think that the addition of the backing vocals and the constantly ringing out bass lines is what really brings this song to life. And again, in comparing Death and Destruction, I feel that the lack of a sense of build-up really helps with this song, as it simply glows with the metal riffs placed in there to give the song some life, rather than helping it to lead somewhere or making it feel as though it's building up to something that never really comes.
It just feels that the band is just having fun, and a regular jamming session that was made into something more cohesive and transformed into this stellar track.
It's
Space
a piece
rock.
of crap. Space rock. I feel like this marks where the album starts taking a bit of a plunge in quality. The fact that this song comes after something as amazing and as great as Burn Jam is a really stark contrast, and honestly a bit of horrible flow in context of the album. I find that the song is produced pretty badly in comparison to the other songs, as the rhythm guitars sound really painful to listen to at times. The harmonies are a little too loud, and Rivers is barely audible at times as a consequence of that. Though the guitar work is pretty alright, as with more tracks on the album. The guitars sound way too loud, especially coming in after Burn Jam. It's alright in terms of a final product, but like I said before, it's just this horrible follow-up and a very weak track in comparison to the quality that I've been presented so far in Maladroit. The sense of fun and the feeling that the band is just jamming so far, it's suddenly thrown out for this short rock song that doesn't really do anything, and it's just a really loud and noisy rock song. And the biggest plus to this is probably how short the song is.
It's a piece of
crap. This is the first track where you can really feel that the production value of the album has taken a slight nosedive. The crashed cymbals and guitars also sound far more painful to listen to, which makes going through it a bit of a chore, as I really wanted to skip it on later listening sessions. This honestly just sounds like a Green Album B-side and goes on for a bit too long for a 3-minute song. Fall Together. This sounds like Weezer trying to replicate the first half of the album but failed and created another Green Album track. I think the vocal work in the bridge is wasted, as it does genuinely sound good and the solo is pretty gnarly for what it is. There's also this weirdly white pan back vocals when Together is sang that I noticed because it just blared on my right speaker for whatever reason. It's just essentially a dragged out, slower dope nose with some very prevalent green elements thrown in for good measure.
It's a piece of
Possibilities.
crap.
Sounds like a slowed down punk track without the screaming vocals and kick snare at 200 beats per minute. Maybe if this was a 1 minute song, I feel like it would have been a better fit, because I feel this song drags a bit, even at a short runtime of just 2 minutes. I'd much rather listen something by Green Day or The Descendants for something of similar nature, but made well. Love Explosion. Meh. It's an alright track with a cool chorus and guitar moments, as with most of the songs. Although not anywhere close to Raditude levels of generic pop punk, this does get dangerously close with the jump out sounding like something off Simple Plan, still not getting any. The harmonies also feel like they're just slapped on, along with the continuing decline in production. Not really much else to say about this one. December. And lastly, we have December. I think this song just has a bit of wasted potential, because I think that if this song did what Death and Destruction did, and took a far more acoustic or atmospheric approach to it, instead of this huge, overly heavy guitar sound, which just ends at the bridge, I think the song would have been great, because the drum fills with the singing are really impressive there. As a result of the whole song being a rock fest, it does dumb down and make the rest of the song just feel slightly saturated, as it would have worked better as something which had a bit of a natural progression to it rather than a simple rock song. As for my thoughts on the full album as a whole, I think that the drums on the album and the general production is pretty excellent for the album. However, on the equally bad side is the amount of uncut fat on it, especially on the entire second half of the album. The main issue I have with this album is that at times it feels like a B-side compilation more than an actual album release, because there's a very distinct lack of flow, especially after Burn Jam. The whole band having fun and jamming ideas aesthetic present in the first half of the album that was very apparent suddenly disappears in favor for a more overproduced sound similar to Green Album that just makes the album feel as though it's dragging its feet to hit a certain album runtime quota, rather than having actual tracks that add on to the full experience. I feel as though the first half of Maladroit is easily some of Weezer's best work from the era, and could have easily contested some of my album picks in the next video as well. And if I were to rate solely on the positive and ignore all the negatives on the album, a la the second half, then yeah, I would easily put Maladroit higher. And the thing is,
Every time I listen to Maladroit, I do think very positively of the general sound and the presentation of ideas, but there's just something that keeps shoving it to the back for me. Perhaps it's a result of the production taking a nosedive after Burn Jam. Maybe it's the second half of the songs ending up blending and meshing together as a result of how similar some tracks sound. It could be because it feels like a compilation album at times, but at the end of the day, I really don't know. But I think that it basically boils down to a lack of forethought and foresight given to the presentation of the album as a full experience rather than what tracks have to offer on their own. Reddit user Kid Idiotech, great Radiohead reference by the way, gives a nice little summary of my thoughts on the album, which I'll place on the screen right now. Feel free to pause and read it. One of my biggest issue I had with this album is how long some of the songs feel. I was very shocked to find that most of the songs were 2 to 3 minutes, as they all felt like 4-minute songs, and at a total runtime of around 35 minutes, the album sure feels like it's an hour long at times. I do feel if they remove everything after Burn Jam and went straight to Love Explosion in December to follow the usual 10-track format, it would have worked a lot better and easily helped the album climb several spots up for me. However, in its current form, the inherent lack of consistency and just something holding it back from consolidating the ideas presented in the track just makes me not really want to rank it any higher than it is. Also, as a side note, away from the review, something that entertained me about Maladroit is how it's being overexposed as a result of it being labeled as underrated so much, to the point where it's kind of overrated now, like let down by Radiohead. And the fact that it's become somewhat of a meme on the subreddit is all the more entertaining for me. And in fact, it's even some of the top comments in Anthony Fantano's videos about Weezer throughout. My final album rating would have to be It's Alright and Underrated. Now, on to the last album of this part of my review, Make Believe. The main reason I rate this album higher than Maladroit is because I feel that there's less downtime on the album. If I were to compare tracks, I think that Maladroit has far better great tracks, but as a full album experience front to back, I can pretty much disregard the whole second half of Maladroit after Burn Jam, whereas in Make Believe, I just had to power through a couple of songs here and there. From that perspective of reviewing an album in its entirety of what substance it contains, I think that Make Believe succeeds better, and now let's go into depth as to why I think so. It's a piece of crap! There is no dispute that this is my least favorite single and album opener released by Weezer to date. If I never found out the existence of the Beverly Hills is a piece of crap parody on YouTube, there would really be not much of a reason I would have to revisit this track as much as I did, aside from listening to the albums front to back for the sake of the reviews. The only way to really enjoy this song is to block out the sound of the song and just think about the parody or dreaming about what Blastoff could have possibly sounded like if it was produced in a more modern setting or pulled out of its demo version. I suppose my increased enjoyment of this track is not so much of it growing on me, but more of, as a result, the aforementioned reasons of it be a shadow of what it possibly could be. I also do believe that as a result of this track being the introduction of the album, it really sets a crappy tone for the rest of the album. I think that it's far better for listeners to just start off with Perfect Situation, unless they feel like listening to a decent radio sing-along track that doesn't really add much, aside from maybe some High School Musical nostalgia vibes from the bridge. Heck, even the solo in the song sounds like a parody of Maladroit and Green Album made with a kazoo that someone found lying around. I can appreciate this song for what it is, a mind-numbing sing-along for radio listeners or Weezer first-timers, but anything beyond that, I can't really find exciting or any elements of the song to be jumping out to me. If you're looking for a simple rock song to headbang to, I would suggest this, but beyond that, just don't take this song too seriously like Can't Stop Partying, and you might enjoy yourself more than you thought you would. Perfect Situation. This is like the entire Green Album condensed into a single good track, which is really saying a lot about how bland Green Album is in retrospect. I mean, even the band members mentioned in an interview that this track is kind of like a leftover and could have fit on the Green Album quite well. I think that this track fixes a lot of problems I encountered with the encumbering, repetitive nature of the tracks on the Green Album. For instance, the wah solo is far better as there's actual soloing instead of just focusing on the vocal pattern and adding some fancy layers in there. And there's some decent soul and energy to the singing as well. Plus, there's some added instrumentation such as the neat little pianos and the woes, which may come off as pandering to pop music, and some people may not like that, but I feel like it works for what it is.
On the contrary though, the simple chorus melody allows for this song to be a very fun sing-along, and I find myself singing along almost every time this song is played. I also love the lyrics on the song as they feel fresh off of Pinkerton with this nerdy, needy situation, as the author is forced to sing along to his heart while getting nowhere with his romance. The song screams and reeks of desperation from start to end with this gloomy, empty room feeling as though the author is constantly fumbling to make the song for the girl of his dreams but failing to do anything else substantial to advance his romances. And if not for a later track on this album, this could have easily been an S rank, but I'm limited to my top 3, so for sake of discussion,
This is such a pity.
I always found myself really enjoying this track since the first time I heard it. I think the biggest negative for most people is probably how uninspired this song may sound, since to some it may essentially sound like a 80s retrofitted into a Weezer context, but I find that for what it is, it works really well. The synths are very sweet to listen to as they swell in and out throughout the track to allow the guitar to shine through, and I wish that Weezer did more of this on Raditude instead of the disaster that was the random 2000s pop synths that was sprayed throughout the album. Throughout the song, the solo is pretty cool, River's vocal work is pretty cool, the production's pretty cool, the slight phaser harmonies are pretty cool, and the song in general is just pretty cool. I think the best thing going for this song is the vibes it sets with this almost hypnotic guitar tone layered on top of everything that just sounds so dreamy and far away, and it's honestly a personal underrated gem because, well, it's far from what Weezer is known for, which is their heavy alternative rock sound, and this song is just really well made and just sounds really cool, and it's easily one of my favorites off the album because it really stands out.
Hold me.
I really do adore this track, from the soft guitars that just erupt into this loud anthemic sound of Rivers begging someone to hold him. The beginning of this song with the clean, twangy guitar tone, with this soft bass along with Rivers' soft singing, feels as though the song is trying to caress you with so much finesse and fragility, showing a sense of vulnerability the song is trying to showcase so well through its themes and lyrics. Although the vocal delivery lacks a loud rockstar punch to it, I think it's quintessential, as Rivers does such a stellar job of portraying the meaning of the song by taking this sadder, lonelier sounding approach which fit extremely well with the track. The little touches of vocal harmonies throughout the song also give this tenderness in moments where the song is seemingly trying to explode, giving this song a great grounding and foundation for the setting it's trying to give. The song in one word can be described as gripping. It just gives you a sense of melancholy and neediness that just pushes this track so much from start to finish, where it ends with a simple ringing guitar. And as a result of this overbearing emotion, this song beats out Perfect Situation for its position on the S rank just because of the perfect delivery.
Peace.
I think it's best to draw a comparison to the Green album here, despite of how much I've been saying not to do that, but oh well. I feel as though in directly comparing to Green, this song has something that most tracks on the album was missing, which was a sense of passion, emotion, and actual guitar work. It also follows up a bunch of very unique tracks, which is refreshing as the flow of the album so far has been pretty phenomenal. However, I think this track also falls short for the similar reasons on Green album, which is due to the tracks before it already being better done and a far more well-established version of itself at this point of the album. Whilst the track still manages to cling on and does a good job of what it is, it doesn't do an excellent job, which is why I think it shies far away from being an excellent track or anywhere close to being an S-rank track. As for the song itself, the blend of the constantly falling riffs that come in and out with Rivers wailing his poor brain for peace along with the perfectly layered acoustic and electric guitar is very pretty, along with the bass line. Though I will note at this point that there is a somewhat noticeable overuse of the woes and the ohs in the album on this track in particular, especially.
We are all on drugs.
We Are All on Drugs. In my original sit-through of the album, this was one of the songs that really stood out to me because it sounded much more different than the mellow approach the album has been so known for up to this point. The druggy riff to the simple anthemic rock sound really sold the song for me. Sure, the lyrics don't really stand out and are dangerously close to Raditude levels at some points, but I find that the energy of this song is just so infectious and it makes up for the lack of lyricism. I also think that the production could have been a little better in some parts, especially on the cymbals and some of the rhythm guitar, as the song does hurt a little to listen to and fatigues you quite easily, with the biggest offenders being the parts where the song is slamming on the snares to do this mini hype build-up thing. This is also unfortunately where the album starts to take a bit of a nosedive into territory. The Damage in Your Heart. Possibly the first real dud on the album. I think if anything, this song just suffers from its placement on the album, and similar to Peace, I think the track feels a bit squished in, as it feels a bit of a filler because this song feels quite bland in context of the album. As a result of its placement, I think the track loses a sense of uniqueness to it, to stand out, and suffers from being shoehorned to the back because of all the songs that precedent it. Perhaps Weezer could have brought back the prevalent synths to help this track stand out more from the earlier songs, which have pretty much vanished at this point of the album and has taken more of a backseat role, being barely noticeable in this track itself. I do feel as though this song has a lot of potential to grow on me, as every time I listen to it, I get more and more emotionally attached, as I do think the chorus of this track is really, really good, but that's really only if I play it on its own. In context of the full album, the song is actually quite weak and forgettable, and aside from the chorus, the rest of the song sounds quite bland in comparison, as though it's already been done earlier on the album far better.
Pardon me.
It's a piece of crap. Started off really strong, but the chorus got old real quick. It sounds bland at best, and it's really nothing more than an amalgamation of Perfect Situation and Hold Me without the emotional gut punch to make it anywhere special or remotely enjoyable. It also steers towards the sounds of Raditude at times with a pinch of mindless pop punkness here and there, especially in the choruses. And the song also drags its feet a bit towards the end, easily one of the weaker tracks that derails the album flow quite a bit in my opinion, and yeah, not really a fan of this one. It's
My
a piece
best
of
friend.
crap. With the new release of the Rivers Cuomo single, Two Broken Hearts, I feel like that song is essentially what My Best Friend is trying to go for, but done way better. And unlike another song in Pinkerton, Why Bother, which is somewhat similar in sound and maybe what this song's trying to achieve, this song lacks the superior energy, vocal delivery, and overall impact to keep the listener locked in. I feel like to some extent it's just a better version of Beverly Hills, which is in that a track you can't really enjoy without mindlessly headbanging to, which isn't really a good thing in an album that's mostly serious and grounded with themes of heartbreak and apology. Similar to Pardon Me, this song just feels like a bland and overly long track that just feels uninspired and is just very pop punkish, I suppose. Yes, a fun song can help alleviate some tension and give a bit of a breather, but couple this with the return of the eardrum tearing production from We're All on Drugs, it just feels like pure filler if anything. This, in all honesty, the album wouldn't really be missing out on anything if this track was just removed. The Other Way. Now this fucking song, this fucking song actually alone pushes Make Believe so much higher because of how amazing of a track it is. Similar to Unspoken on Hurley, it really is, in my opinion, a real hidden gem, and it's a really good song. If it was a bit more raw, darker sounding with some more personal lyrics, I think it could have easily passed for a Pinkerton track, or just something that's a really good emotional gut punch. It's a good bounce back and return to form for the album flow, but the then left by the previous tracks is still pretty prevalent, unfortunately, and this track alone is not really enough to make up for the randomness and jarring rock trio sound that the three tracks were going for. A minor nitpick on the things holding back this track from being a perfect track, or what it could have been, is that it has somewhat unnecessary pop elements like the random clappings and the woes here and there, and the lyrics are also lacking a sense of honesty, and it feels like the lyrics are somewhat watered down, and I feel like I get more out of reading the origins of the song on Genius than I do from listening and understanding and interpreting what the words are in the song itself. I don't know what else to say. I mean, just go listen to the song. I think it speaks for itself above anything. Freak Me Out. The track itself is pretty neat, with the almost synth-like bass and these water droplet sounding synths giving a very lonely, icy cave-like feeling, but unfortunately, on the other hand, it's at this point that I'm reminded again by the lack of synths and the sudden disappearance of them after This Is Such a Pity, and it is such a pity. I feel like a lot of the blander tracks could have used that extra layer of depth that was seemingly forgotten for a more rock-oriented sound, which make this track feel even more out of place and, in a sense, makes the album experience feel quite disjointed. I feel that the album is attempting to experiment in the safest way possible by sprinkling some elements and filler here and there. In all honesty, it's just holding the album back from what it could be. I think that this track could have worked far better if they pushed for more synths and a more mellow approach for the album flow instead of just having a random rock trio and downtime from Damage to Your Heart to My Best Friend. And in its current state, Freak Me Out just feels out of place in between a sing-along anthemic rock song and a closer which is equally as loud, if not louder. As a result, the track just feels wedged in for the sake of padding out the album with the breather track, rather than having a song that fits in and helps to reach the conclusion of the album much more cohesively.
It's
Haunt
a
you
piece
every
of
day.
crap.
And in closing Make Believe, we have on par with Old Girlfriend for being the worst closer, Haunt You Every Day. This is just a song that constantly tries to soar to great heights in many directions but never quite makes it there. There's this heavy brooding guitar, a grandiose solo, a mellow piano with sad melodies, and as a result, it just becomes this hot mess of a track that takes many directions but never ends up anywhere. I think it's a perfect closer for the album, not because of how good it is, but because of how much of a mess it is, similar to the album flows, with ideas seemingly coming in and out for no apparent reasons, and layered with these random woes here and there. So on to the end of my review for Make Believe. I think that Make Believe is an album that's a little underappreciated, as it has a lot of good moments in between pretty acceptable songs that are dangerously bordering on the snooze factor but never really hits the sleep button. In contrast to Maladroit, I feel like a lot of honesty and emotions that come through from some of these tracks, moving on from the let's have fun and jam atmosphere of Maladroit into this darker, broodier album, does help with the general themes of the album. But on the contrary, Make Believe's filler tracks lack the focus and production of Maladroit, and as a result, the heavier tracks suffer immensely and feel like outright filler instead of actual songs. On the plus though, at least the tracks don't fatigue me as much as the second half of Maladroit because the production isn't complete ass. The album attempts to introduce some new elements and ideas for Weezer's sound, but fails to go far enough and instead falls back on a more pop style of experimentation rather than trying out something new. For instance, the synths in This Is Such a Pity take a very passive role after the track is over, barely peeking over onto You Freak Me Out, where it doesn't really do much anyways aside from supplementing the guitars. The album also has way too much woes, which are not on par with Blink's na-na-nas, but close enough to be notable. Whilst the album does have heart and great delivery, the lack of production and general thought into the album as a whole, in turn, puts this album into a slightly dimmer spotlight of what it could have been. This leads to the biggest negative of the album, which is how the flow is pretty atrocious after We Are All on Drugs. The album attempts to go too many directions and ends up not really reaching a proper destination, even further exemplified by the horrible choice of an album closer. And as a result, I feel that trimming the fat on the album would have done a great service to it. If they had just removed or revised some tracks between Damage in Your Heart to Best Friend, I think would have helped the main album by decreasing the downtime and just giving it more fresher ideas. If they had just stuck to their usual 10 track format, I think this album would have easily rated far higher for me. All in all, Make Believe is a heartfelt piece that traverses through romance and failures, best friends and coping with breakups, but despite of that, the lyrics do hold the album back, as it feels as though Rivers was trying to distance himself from being overly open in Pinkerton and instead writes most of the songs from a vaguer perspective that may come off as lazy at times. In essence, Make Believe is an album that tries to go too many directions with a very mellow spine, but never really ends up going anywhere and falls short as a result, not because of what it contains, but how that substance was presented and put together in the end to be nothing short of slightly underwhelming, with great sparks consequently being buried as a result. Despite my mostly negative points on Make Believe, I do really enjoy this album as a whole, and if anything, all my criticisms on the album stem from my disappointment of the delivery of the album as a whole, because of how much I really wanted to rank this album higher on my list, because it contains some of the most emotional moments that Rivers has to offer vocally, along with some of the most mellow moments in Weezer's discography, which have come to become some of my favorites today. And unfortunately, due to its shortcomings, this album is just a perfect line to draw between the mediocre albums with excellent songs here and there to the quote-unquote good albums Weezer has to offer.
And that concludes this part of the Weezer series. Next part will be up next Sunday if everything goes well. And that's about all there is from me this time. I'll see you in the next one. Stay Weezy.